Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Continuing with their summer scout and taking a look at one of the more interesting programs heading into 2023, and that's the Virginia Tech Hokies. And obviously, a very tough first year for Coach Brent Pry. I think you can chalk that up to just Justin Fuente not leaving this program in a very good spot. I mean, you take a look at the personnel and the talent from that roster in 2022, it just wasn't there. And Coach Brent Pry, you can be optimistic about a lot of where this program is going, right? In terms of the recruiting, really picking up in the 2024 class. You bring back a lot of players. You go to the transfer portal and add some talent at that wide receiver room. I'm not picking Virginia Tech to win the ACC, but if this is a team that can get to 6 wins, make a bowl game, show this program is kind of going back to where it belongs, I think you're going to see the recruiting pick up, and I think you're going to see this team in a couple of years be kind of potentially back to where this program belongs. Now, before we jump into the team in 2023, just want to say thank you to you guys. The support for the summer scouting has been absolutely awesome. We learn a lot from the fans as well. So if you guys have comments, you got your takes about players, let us know in the comment section. That is the best part about doing this kind of thing. So we appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. And of course, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys. I'm going to kick this one off to you, and let's just start about where this Virginia Tech program is heading under Coach Brent Pry.
And frankly, to me as a fan, it's always exciting when you get rid of a coach like a Justin Fuente, who just kind of bled that program down. I mean, he started off in a decent spot with Frank Beamer's kind of culture and teams and whatnot. And then as it became more his program and more his stamp on it, it just got worse and worse. And that's a long 6 years when you see a guy take a team from kind of where Beamer had it. And he certainly wasn't had it cooking like he did in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So it was still a solid program. And then to watch Fuente just kind of break it down, it's always nice to start over at that point.
And you go get a guy in Coach Brent Pry who was a GA under Coach Beamer and knows where this program belongs, and he gets the standard, which I think is also kind of an exciting aspect. But you're so right with Justin Fuente, and we're not going to try to drag Justin Fuente, but you look at the recruiting, you look at the personnel of this team. That's not a Virginia Tech roster. This is a team that should be taking top 30, top 25 classes pretty consistently, should be winning a lot of games in the ACC. And by the end of Justin Fuente's tenure, it just wasn't even close to that. You take a look at where this team is in 2023. It's hard to see, especially on the offense, and that's kind of where I want to start. It's hard to see this offense being worse than it was. But I think a lot of it, and I'm just going to say right now, I'll put my hand up. I'm a Grant Wells guy. I think I loved him out of Marshall. I think he had some growing pains at Virginia Tech, but you take a look at what he was working with, right? The wide receiver play was below average, and that might be putting it nicely. The offensive line play probably can say the same thing. That was not a very good offensive line. I think both those units will improve. Grant Wells, I think, is going to turn some heads in 2023.
Yeah, and that'll be the thing. I think when you look at what teams need to do when they bring in a new coach, it's address those positions in need. And with the transfer portal, you can do it quickly. And that's the big thing about what they did this offseason is they brought in a whole new crop of wideouts. Because, like what you said, that's just not good enough. You can't have your second wide receiver being less than 300 yards. That's a really low number. That's just indicative of something's not working in this passing attack. And again, you mentioned Grant Wells has played good football in his college career at times, and I thought he played good football at times.
He's played a lot of football, too. He's played a lot of football in position. And one other thing, I do like bringing in, and I kind of want to know what the Virginia Tech fans, let me know in the comment section what you guys are thinking about this. Kyron Drones, I like, too. This is a guy that was a top 150 national recruit, one of the best quarterbacks out of the state of Texas, transferring over from Baylor. There's a lot to like about his game, too. I'm kind of interested to hear where the Virginia Tech fans have to say about that quarterback room and who they would like to see. And I have a feeling you might see them both, but I went back and kind of prepping for this Virginia Tech preview, watched the spring game. Dude, Grant Wells was slinging that rock. He looked extremely comfortable. Grant Wells is an NFL arm. I don't think people would argue with that. I think the decision-making, the consistency with ball placement, that's probably where you're concerned about. But, man, he looked comfortable. He was ripping the football in the spring game. He looked like the quarterback one for me. But Kyron Drones does offer a lot of potential as well.
I mean, Drones can play. When he came into those Baylor games when Shaping got hurt against West Virginia, you saw some for being a backup and not being the guy taking all the snaps. He played really good football. So I kind of think it will be a bit of a battle, frankly, because again, Grant Wells,
It was
he
ugly.
didn't show me enough last year to say,
Yeah.
well, he deserves to not have to fight this job out. I think he certainly should have to. If he wins it, great. If Kyron Jones wins it, great. I mean, maybe even better because he is a bit younger. You might have a little bit more of a runway with him, and who knows? That's kind of what you're looking for as this Virginia Tech team.
Sure.
It's not an ACC winning team right now. You're looking for the future anyway.
That's a good point. I wonder. I mean, as the head coach, you always have the responsibility to play the best quarter, like play the quarterback that's going to give you the best chance to win. It would be unfair not to. But there is an element of you do throw in Kyron Jones. He is probably the future. He is probably the starting quarterback in 2024. This quarterback room, I think, unarguably is in a much better spot than it was last year. I think Grant Wells looked better. You bring in a young, talented Kyron Jones. And then we mentioned it, the wide receiver position. Brent Pry looked at that group and said, we got to change something. You go and get Ollie Jennings, who went to work on Virginia Tech week 1 last year from Old Dominion. Really excited about him. The other transfers, again, guys who are kind of moving up to the Power 5 level. You have some question marks about the productivity from the Group of 5 or FCS level to Power 5 level. Now, I'm going to say this right now. Stephen Gosnell, spring game warrior. And again, I'm not going to try to put so much stock into the spring game. I get it. But, man, he looked like he can be a big-time contributor in 2023.
Yeah, and ultimately you're gonna need a couple of them to play. You need some have at least 3 who you can trot out there and are gonna catch some footballs and be really relatively productive. And if you do that, you put Grant Wells or Kyron Jones, whoever plays, in a much better spot than they were last year.
And the running back room, I like the running back room. I think Malachi Thomas, if he stays healthy, I think he's a very solid running back in the ACC. You go and get Tootin from the FCS level, who was extremely productive, like 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, really, really productive dude. I don't think the running backs were the problem. I think the problem was a lackluster, to put it nicely, passing game, where it's like teams knew you're going to try to run the football. When you're looking at 8-man boxes with an offensive line that is not a dominant group, it was hard for them to get the run game going. I think another kind of key to this equation is this offensive line. And there's 2 ways you could read into it, right? Brent Pry looked at that wide receiver room and said, we got to go to the transfer portal because we do not like what we have in this room. The offensive line was not good last year either, but they don't go to the transfer portal. They say, hey, I think we like what we have on this offensive line. They're a bunch of younger guys. Maybe optimistic. There's an optimistic lens where like Brent Pry and this offensive staff looked at this group and said, I think we can do some work with this group and we're going to kind of ride with what we have. And maybe you see an improved group in 2023.
And you gotta hope so. Again, to me, it is a little surprising that they didn't add 1 or 2 guys in the portal. It just feels like a spot that a good FCS lineman or non-Power 5 lineman could come in and play immediately and give themselves a shot at a bit more exposure. But who knows? I mean, I'm not in that locker room. I don't know what Brent Pry sees and offensive line coach. Maybe he does think these redshirt freshmen are going to play, or some of these younger guys we didn't get to see last year. And I mean, we'll see. Again, am I expecting it to be like the unit that's driving this team forward? Probably not. I mean, that'd be a real surprise, but it's got to be better. However they do it, whether it's development, whether it's playing younger players, but at the end of the day, it just needs to be better because they didn't give Grant Wells a good enough shot, I didn't think.
No, they didn't. And I'm not picking this offense to be like a top 25 offense in the country. But if you go from, you look at the power numbers, like they were outside the top 100 in pretty much every meaningful statistic category on the offensive side of the football. If you can even just get into the top 75, which I think they certainly can with the improvements they made at the wide receiver position and bringing in another quarterback in Kyron Jones, like you're winning more football games. This was a team that was 1-4 in 1-score games last year. If you can just get a little bit more productivity out of this offense, you're looking at a much more competitive team. Because, Dill, when you look at the defense, I think this defense last year was even better than like the numbers say, just because it is so hard to put up good numbers on the defense side of the ball when an offense is consistently putting you in the spots that they were putting them in last year.
Frankly, that's what you're kind of optimistic about. That's probably, I mean, that Brent Pry, obviously defensive guy coming over from Penn State as their DC. That's the unit that looked good. I thought they flew around, they played physical. I thought their secondary, they all hit, they all tackle, they play kind of that ball you want to see. And frankly, I think you start up at their defensive line. This interior has 4 guys who can really play.
Really
and I think Josh Fuga and Norrell Pollard, they both look like they might be NFL players.
Yeah, the interior defensive line, I think you're really excited for. I'm looking for who is going to step up in terms of that edge rusher because you got some production to replace. You go to the portal, you go get a guy in Antoine Powell from Florida who has some juice. I know you mentioned Jaron McDonald as a guy that keep your eyes on.
Jordan McDonald.
Jordan McDonald.
He didn't get to play a lot last year, but I saw a play against Duke, and you just saw the flash where like this guy has some edge capability. And again, I think CJ McCray and Cole Nelson are solid players, but you didn't see a ton of that like
Alpha.
Man, that's like NFL kind of pass rush ability on the edge. Jordan McDonald again, it was kind of like one play I'm going off of, but a young guy, let's see if he can be the guy. I don't know. I mean, you gotta look for something. It's like
flash a little talent and catches Dale's eyes 1 rep at Duke. Come on, fire him up. Linebacker play. I know you weren't before we recorded. You weren't as high on it. I like this group. Alan Tisdale being kind of a guy that is a really experienced dude that can go sideline to sideline. Sign me up for a little Kelly Lawson. Like, yeah, you talk about my guy who just looks the part of being a kind of all ACC linebacker. I'm hoping we get to see a lot of him as well. It's a group that, maybe not as good as you wanted to see last year. You lose a guy in Dax Holyfield, who I feel like was there for just like 60 years. He was playing for Coach Beamer. I wouldn't be surprised. But Kelly Lawson, man, he's a guy that I'm very, very excited about.
I know Dax Holyfield did some good things at Virginia Tech, but I mean, the games, he just didn't feel always athletic enough. He didn't cover the sidelines particularly well. It felt like that allowed some big plays to be hit. And that was my issue. I mean, you just gave up so many plays in the run game of 20 plus. You just can't have that consistently. I do think they need to get more athletic at this linebacker spot.
Kelly Lawson, sign him up.
So like that's the thing. You're looking to play with a little more speed because again, I think this interior defensive line can kind of do their thing in the middle. But if guys get outside, they need to be able to tackle them with their linebackers. And I just didn't think there was enough of that last year. There were way too many big plays.
And then finally, you said it, this secondary is legit. I mean, Nasir Peoples, I think, is really good. Dorian Strong, obviously kind of an NFL caliber guy. If you can get a little bit more pass rush from this front seven, you're looking at a secondary room that I think can force a lot more turnovers. And that was something that was a little bit of a sore spot, right? Didn't even average over a turnover per game forced on the defense side of the ball. But man, the personnel in the secondary, like, I like it.
This is a unit like I'm totally comfortable with going into the season. I think adding Derek Canteen will certainly help because they did need to replace Armani Chapman, and he could play. He was probably their best corner. So go in, add an experienced football player to the group. And again, you look, their safeties, I think both are really good. I think Nasir Peoples is really, really good. And then this unit played good. I didn't think they got exposed at all last year. It's just they did give up a lot of big plays in the run. That was pretty much what hurt them mostly.
Yeah, and I want to talk now, like the last piece of the puzzle when you're previewing this team is just what is the win-loss record expectation for Brent Pry? Obviously, it wasn't great last year. They were 1-4 in one-score games. 6-6, I think, would be a really solid year for Coach Brent Pry. And you talk about like we've talked about this with Miami as well. Like this is probably not an ACC championship caliber team now. But when you talk about 2024, 2025, building this thing in the right direction, getting it back to where it belongs, I think you put together a 6-6 bowl game season for Virginia Tech. You finish with a really strong 2024 class where they're trending to, and you get some guys on campus in the fall. You see a more successful team that is, competitive in the ACC. This is a team that you're 6-6 would be great, and I'm kind of interested to hear what the Virginia Tech fans have to say about expectations. 6-6, finish with a really good 2024 class. I think you're off and running in 2024 and 2025 here.
Yeah, and obviously you want to win football games. Like this has no participation trophies in that sport at that level, especially for a guy like Brent Pry, because his job will certainly hinge on it.
He would be absolutely pissed at us if we're talking about moral victories. Hopefully he's not.
But like, I mean, realistically, to me, this year's not really about the record because, again, you said it. This isn't really – Justin Fuente didn't leave them in a place to be competing for ACC titles right now, and we all know that. It will be about can you go play at Florida State and not look like you're I don't know,
That's
like
the
a
only,
community
you
college.
look at
You
this
want to play
roster,
respectable.
and you look at this schedule, that's the only game where I'm saying it could get ugly. And I fully, with a defense that I think can be really solid and an offense that's going to take steps, I want to start with these first 4 games. Old Dominion, they got to win that game. At home, week 1, you have to win that game after losing last year. You play Purdue, which I think is going to be a good team. That being said, new head coach, new quarterback, new offensive system, new everything for Purdue. You're getting them early. I like their chances at winning that one at home. Rutgers on the road's a toss-up. I think Rutgers is not necessarily the Rutgers of old. And then on the road at Marshall, if you go 3-1 in that 4-game stretch,
That'd be a good result out of that because that's a tough 4 out of conference games aside from Old Dominion, which should be a win. You would think.
Yeah, and then you look at, and the ACC is tough. Like, there's a lot of solid teams, but the only game that I'm really saying, like, it's really hard to see them going on the road and beating Florida State. But Pitt, I see that as a competitive game.
I mean, they played Pitt so tough last year until it broke open late, but for all that whole game, it was like they were right there. Same thing with like an NC State. I mean, they were tough with these teams last year. The offense didn't have the firepower to kind of bring them over the hump. But
yeah, and I guess we're saying we're not saying that they're going to win all these games outside of Florida State, but you're 1-4 in the 1-score games last year. If you can just kind of flip that narrative, take care of business at Virginia on the road and on the road at BC, I think 6-6 is very, very reasonable for a team that I feel like the national media is kind of writing off because they did do some things in the transfer portal and in the offseason that you feel good about. And then you just feel good about this team year 2 in the culture being a little bit more competitive. This is going to be a fun team to watch. I'm certainly going to be watching that Purdue game because I think that's going to tell you a lot about what this Virginia Tech team has to offer in 2023. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, Virginia Tech fans, let us know in the comment section if we're sleeping on some players, sleeping on a position group. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.